Aloha and welcome to another episode of Patroma Therapy. We are on episode 17 and we appreciate your listening. Today, our episode is called Home Sweet Home, and you will see our cover shot is of a single flower, the peony. So, what do you think of when you think of Home Sweet Home?
That peony, a picture of which we have for our cover shot, that's what my grandmother had grown when I was a kid. Brings me back in time. It's a strange feeling, and I'm not sure if I want to experience them each time when I think of my childhood, because it's kind of pleasure and pain at the same time. And
Yes, it's poignant.
it's difficult not to be nostalgic.
Well, I know that the expression "there's no place like home" comes from the movie The Wizard of Oz, which I saw as a little girl. It was actually produced in 1939, and we have the character of Dorothy, who gets knocked on the head during a tornado, and then it's kind of this dream sequence of what happens as she goes on a journey to try to find the wizard and return home again. So I live in Dallas, where we also have tornadoes, and it's called Tornado Alley. So there's like Kansas, Oklahoma, and then North Texas. So I am in Tornado Alley, but I've always liked that movie. Did you watch it before?
I watched it and I read the book. I liked it a lot, but I didn't pay my attention if that was about the idea of leaving home or there is nothing like home. It was about Flying Monkey and the Tin Man and the Dorothy girl and the Wicked Witch and that little dog. What's her name? Toto. That was the whole book. The idea of the whole book was about dream, like she woke up at the end. Is that right?
Yes, she's knocked out, and then she has the dream sequence, and then certain secrets are revealed to her in the dream sequence, and then in the end she wakes back up and she sees her loving family around her, and they all lived happily ever after.
You know, you mentioned family, and I thought that's an interesting point because is it the house or the people in it that you were longing for when you think of the home or for your childhood?
Well, since I grew up in a military family and we moved every 2 years, I probably lived in about 20 different houses as a child. And so I didn't really have a childhood home, but I remember my grandparents' house and the porch and the plants that were around it and the cooking of my grandmother. And then, I don't know, I mean, home to me is more like a state of mind, like the smells of certain foods, certain plants,
Hmm.
certain familiar objects. But I didn't have one specific childhood home.
It's a little bit different
That
for me, but go on.
Well, I'm saying that's why I'm in therapy. I'm in Patroma therapy. I've moved too many times, and I don't have very many roots, so that's why I'm kind of all over the place, and I need to be in therapy. But then you also have your problems too, so you're in therapy also.
Sure. It's just I want to say that I left my childhood home when I was like about 18, and I left it for the reasons which later, many years ago, drew me back. Like when I was like 30 or 35. Isn't that funny? Because you leave because you want to cut ties with it, and then you go back because you won't have it back again.
Yes, yes. Well, I know that I traveled. I am born in Texas, and I am an American, but I remember wherever I traveled all over Europe and in the Middle East, I identified myself more as a Texan as opposed to an American. And I just remember, as I would travel, I always had dreams about Texas and dreams about my grandparents' house. And I remember being able to walk in the different rooms. And I guess it's a feeling of security because that was a place that never changed. The grandparents' home was always there and always had the same bush in the front and always had the same trees. And in the backyard was a little tiny house that my grandfather had made for my mother and uncle to play in. And I just know that as a child going into the backyard with these tall pecan trees, it was such a great adventure. And we would take a little basket and we'd collect, pecan nuts, and we could spend the whole day in the backyard, and we would imagine Indians and we would imagine all these different things. And then as I grew up and became an adult and then I actually bought that house after my grandmother passed away. I bought that house. And then I remember just going back to that house and then seeing the backyard was so small. The little house that was my mother's childhood playhouse was like all molded and falling apart, and there it was like so sad because the grand house of my imagination was really quite humble.
What's with that expression? You can never go home again. Is there a cliche or a phrase like that, or a book written by Thomas Wolfe? Have you read it?
Yeah, it's you can't go home again. He's an American novelist, and he wrote a really long book. I mean, not as long as Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, but you can't go home again is the idea that what you have as a child can never be recaptured because time moves on. And then when you try to go back, it's never quite the same because while the place may remain the same, it is you who have changed.
Well, you say like it's a bad thing. But there's a flip side to that coin. There is nothing constant but change. We have to have the ability to appreciate it, even if it happens with our childhood homes or the place where we lived or the towns where we grew up. So even if I have this nostalgic feeling, bittersweet feeling about how it was different those times, I still appreciate the changes, and that's a conflict.
Well, I mean, there's also another expression related to nostalgia, which is like a fond memory, the idea that absence makes the heart grow fonder. And what we're away from, we long for. So like you said, you wanted to leave your little town, and then later when you became a man, you wanted to return to it. I mean, there's a famous novel by Marcel Proust, À la recherche du temps perdu, In Search of Lost Time. And this is like one of the great works of French fiction. The narrator, his name is Swan. He's having some tea and he dips a little Madeleine cookie into the tea. And all of a sudden, the smell and the sensation, it's involuntary memory. It like launches him back into his childhood. And it's like a meditation on time.
You mentioned that you bought the childhood home, or did I get you wrong?
Yes, I bought it.
That seemed like a great idea to me. I thought to do the same myself a few years ago. Like, the prospect of owning my childhood home was too hard to resist. The opportunity, didn't have much yet with this nostalgia.
Well, the thing is that it's like you can hold on to something that's gone. It's like holding on to the intangible. And I mean, like I can close my eyes right now and I can walk into this one house that my parents owned. I think I might have mentioned it in another episode where my brothers and I went out into the, bushy territory and we played Indians and we made a fire. And it's like when you were wild and young and free and unencumbered by jobs and insurance and COVID and taxes. And it's just like a time of great freedom that I think we all long for.
It's a memory of something good, but this good, it somehow got lost, and that's painful.
It is painful because I, against my better judgment, I should have kept that house, but it wasn't I should have kept it, but I sold it for some other reasons and turned it into cash for some other reasons and then some other reasons and other reasons. And I it's like one of my life themes that I don't have a home. It's like it's also kind of spiritual because like we're all gonna die, and like this is like a completely real statement I'm gonna tell you. Do you know who I like to go visit and where I like to spend time? This is so true. So typically me. I love cemeteries because the people are always there. You don't have to ask permission. They're always ready to listen, and it's always quiet. So whenever I go back to San Antonio, I visit the old cemeteries, or when I visit any place, if I'm in Istanbul or if I'm in Portland or if I'm in Houston, I love to go to cemeteries. And I've done some historical research on cemeteries, but I love the Père Lachaise in Paris. Like Jim Morrison is buried there, Degas. I mean, like it's amazing. Toulouse-Lautrec. I mean, I recommend cemeteries as a great place to relax.
No, no, I agree. I know this all sounds a bit sad, but you also mentioned that you traveled a lot and you left home early, and we discussed Mark Twain the other day and how many quotes he said. There was one, I don't remember it verbatim, but it went like, "Traveling is the antidote to ignorance." That probably means that the earlier you leave the hometown, the like smarter streetwise, smarter
Yeah,
you'll be.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you live a very circumscribed life with just the rules and the ideas and the prejudices of the people that are around you who've never left, then you don't get a very big picture of the wide world. And one of the things I was very grateful for of growing up in a very unrooted family all over the world is that I got to see and explore that most people want the same things, whether they're in Turkey or New York or California or Germany, that we want to be loved, we want to have shelter, we want to have some people around us that care for us, we want to have families. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I
Sounds
learned more about tolerance, as from travel, just direct experience. Like no one taught me this stuff, just travel taught it to me.
Anyway, we both left home, or maybe the home left us. And like we may not be able to go back again, as Thomas Wolfe said, but the love we had of the place where we grew up, like, is still with
Yes,
us.
that's true. And I mean, I have some things that are from the past. I have an old mantle clock that was my great grandmother's, and her house burned down. And then she moved in with my grandmother, and then my grandmother passed away. And then when we were cleaning out my grandmother's house, I kept the clock. So I don't know. Somehow I'm very fond of things. I'm very fond of old things. I mean, you had a wristwatch that you spoke of in another episode that came from what, your grandfather?
Hmm. Yeah, it was
Do
a
you have any?
wristwatch from my childhood. It belonged to my grandfather and still with me. Somehow that some things stay with you all your life.
I also have these small tables there, little small stack tables that go inside of each other, and they have some inlaid mother of pearl. And my father, who was in the military, he used to ride horses, and he was in the Khyber Pass in between, I think, Pakistan and Afghanistan or something like that. And he brought these tables out of the Khyber Pass. And I just remember him telling me as I was growing up that everything and anything from the world is available there. And at the time, I didn't understand it, but it was a very important security point, and there was all probably like drugs and trafficking and opium and who else knows what. But I have these Afghan tables from the Khyber Pass, so I don't know if my house was going to go up in flames and I would want to take a few things out. I would probably take those tables, take my grandmother's clock, and I don't know, maybe like a box of old photographs. What would you take out of your place if you had to quickly leave? Suppose you can only pick up three things.
Nothing probably. I remember there is this saying that the rear view in your car is small for the reason. So I'm not trying to, or rather, I'm trying not to look back too often. But life must go on. Life moves in one direction. There is no way to go back home.
Gosh, that sounds like a closing statement. I think you're right. I think this brings us to the end of episode. What episode are we on?
17. Lord, I'm
Very
coming
good.
home to you. Just these words from Sweet Home Alabama song. I remember, Lord, I'm coming home to you.
Wow.
Do you remember? Do you know that song? Sweet Home
I know that's a
Alabama?
Texas. I know that's a Texas song. It's a song of the South, and it's like very much like Texas. I'm not Texas, but Southern rock, and it's about like how sweet it is to be in the South. How
But yeah, it's from Forrest Gump.
hmm. Well, maybe we should discuss some movies in another episode. What do you think?
And so we shall.